Welcome to Must I Evolve, a micro-learning experience where ancient wisdom meets the modern soul. I'm Andrew H. Housley, author, spiritual provocateur, and bodhisattva, doing my best to walk the middle path. This space, it's for the seeker, the skeptics, and those who feel the quiet pull for something deeper. Each episode is an opportunity, short, potent, and quietly disruptive. We explore Zen thought, spiritual lessons, personal transformation, and the subtle truths that shape us. Sometimes they appear as a question, sometimes a gentle nudge. Let's begin. The productivity cage. Of all the invisible cages, this one is the hardest to see because it doesn't look like a cage. It looks like discipline. It looks like ambition. It looks like someone who has their life together. And that's exactly why it holds so many people. An invisible cage is not a wall you can see or a door you can push against. It's a belief that has settled so deeply into the body that it no longer feels like a belief. It feels like the truth of who you are. Spiritually, it is the place where the soul stops moving, not because it's arrived, but because it's forgotten how to be free. There is a question most people never say out loud, and it's, am I doing enough? Not just at work, not just in a career, but in life itself. It sits underneath the busyness, behind the lists, below the constant motion. And the answer from many people is always the same. I'm not doing enough yet. Yeah, we live in a culture that treats output as identity. What you produce is what you're worth. What you accomplish is what you are. How busy you are is how seriously you should be taken. And over time, this stops being a belief and it becomes a cage. Not because productivity is wrong, work has meaning. Effort provides dignity. Creating things matter. But when your sense of worth becomes tied to your output, something starts to shift. Rest starts to feel dangerous, not physically, psychologically. Slowing down begins to feel like falling behind. Doing less starts to feel like being less. A quiet afternoon starts to feel like a problem to solve. So we stay in motion, not because the work is required, but because stopping feels worse. This is the invisible part of the cage. The bars aren't made of obligation or demand, they're made of identity. The story that says, this is what a serious person looks like. This is what someone who cares looks like. This is what I have to be. And because the story feels true, the cage never gets questioned. It sometimes becomes celebrated. The Zen master Kodo Sawaki kind of summarizes this pretty clearly in a quote of his. If you aren't careful, you'll start making a big fuss just to feed yourself. You're constantly in a hurry, but why? Just to feed yourself. Chickens are too in a hurry when they peck at their food, but why? Only to be eaten by humans. It's a sharp thing to sit with. All that urgency, all that motion, toward what exactly? Constantly doing can be a way of avoidance, avoiding a question. And that question lives in stillness. And it asks you, who am I when I'm not performing? For many people, that question is terrifying. Not because the answer is bad, but because they've never let themselves sit long enough to find out. And we've come to that part of each episode of Must I Evolve where I find a Zen story to illustrate this. A young monk goes to his master and says, "Master, I work before sunrise until after dark. I study, I clean, I meditate, I never stop. When will I be ready? When will enlightenment find me?" The master handed him an empty bucket and said, "Go to the well and bring me water." The monk went to the well, filled the bucket to the top, carried it back carefully, afraid to spill a single drop. He was struggling. He was tired. He was so anxious about not wasting a drop that when he arrived, he was breathless, shaking, and there was water sloshing all over the sides of the bucket. The master looked at the half-empty bucket and said, "You worked very hard, but you arrived with less than what you started with. The effort was real. The approach was the problem." This is what happens when doing becomes the answer to every question. The effort is real. The exhaustion is certainly real, but the thing you are reaching for keeps slipping away because worth was never something you could produce. And this is where the cage reveals itself. Not in the moments when you're overwhelmed, but in the moments when you could stop and you don't. There is a difference between working with purpose and working to outrun a feeling. One comes from a place of fullness. The other arrives from a place of fear. Fear that if you stop, you'll discover something you'll discover that nothing's there. Fear that the world will stop valuing you. Fear that without doing, there is no you. This is what the productivity cage protects. Not a life well lived, a story about needing to earn your place in it. The shift begins with a small, uncomfortable experiment. Just stop. Not forever, just for a moment. And notice what happens in the stillness. Notice the pull to check something, the urge to optimize the pause, the discomfort of being present without producing anything. That discomfort is information. It tells you where the cage is. And seeing the cage, even for a moment, is already the beginning of stepping out of it. Rest is not a reward for finishing. Presence is not something you earn. Your value does not begin when the work begins and disappear when the work stops. These are not truths that productivity can prove. They are truths that only stillness can reveal. And the key insight of this episode is simple. You don't need to earn rest. You need to remember yourself. Not the version of yourself that performs, not the version that produces, not the version that justifies its existence through effort. The version that was already whole before the first task was ever completed. That's not something you build. It's something that you return to. And when you do, the work that follows is no longer driven by fear. It's driven by something quieter and far more steady. Thanks for listening to Must I Evolve? Remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be patient. That's the real practice. As for your next evolution, it doesn't live in who you should become. It lives in what already grows within you. Until next time, keep evolving, quietly, consistently, and always with no expectations.